All right, so this is part 7 of our study on the book of John. And we have made it to John chapter 1, verse 35. And today, my hopes is that we'll get through the end of the chapter, but we won't finish up the chapter. And we'll probably spend at least 3 sections here of going through what we go through today. So while we'll get through the rest of this chapter in terms of reading it, we will be referring back to it and covering some additional concepts as we go. And so last week we covered the subject of behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, which we'll cover a little bit in this week, and as well as some other subjects from last week. And in terms of the spirit of holiness, in that Yeshua was to baptize in, how's that connected in Jewish thought? And so this week we're going to get into a little bit more of the disciples and understanding some of the dialogue that takes place, because John writes a different story of the disciples, or how he obtains the different disciples, how they come to him. And so there's a reason for it, and I want to explain, or at least offer an opinion that I think offers a good explanation. So let's just go ahead and read through this first section that is 35 through 42. And it said, this is out of the Peshitta, out of the Aramaic in plain English that I'm pulling from BibleHub.com. And another day, Yochanan was standing, and 2 of his disciples and he gazed upon Yeshua as he was walking, and he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the 2 of his disciples heard as he spoke, and they went after Yeshua. And Yeshua turned, and he saw them coming after him. And he said, "What are you seeking?" And they said, "Our master, where are you staying?" He said, "Come and see." And they came and saw where he lived, and stayed with him that day. And it was the 10th hour. One of them who heard Yochanan and followed Yeshua himself was Andrew, Shimon's brother. This one first saw Shimon, his brother, and he said to him, "We have found the Messiah." And he brought him to Yeshua, and Yeshua gazed at him, and he said, "You are Shimon, son of Yonah. You shall be called Kepha." Once again, we see that Yochanan the Immerser is saying about Yeshua, "Behold the Lamb of God." As with many quotes in the New Testament, in the Gospels, but beyond what we call the New Testament, writings refer to concept, which is what we have previously discussed on this topic in part 5. And so the author highlights that the 2 of Yochanan's disciples received this information, and they responded by taking off the covering of Yochanan as disciples of Yochanan, as the rabbi, and embraced Yeshua as the rabbi from this point forward. We know that Yochanan was humble enough to recognize this role, and that he was to prepare the way for Yeshua the Messiah, which was portrayed in earlier passages. We need to keep in mind it would have been improper to leave their rabbi without their rabbi's blessing. Because if they did that, that would be Hilul Hashem, and it would defame the disciple, because no longer are they truly a disciple. What that means is that they are not truly a disciple if they're willing to just, "Oh, there's a new guy, let's go see what's new." Instead, they knew what Yochanan was saying, because not everybody left. It just said 2 of them, and 2 of his disciples. Notice in 37, it says specifically, "and 2 of his disciples." So these were disciples of Yochanan, and they went and followed Yeshua. Now, how do I know that Yeshua became their rabbi? Well, we know that later these were of the 12 disciples mentioned later, but we know this by this passage here in 38. Our master. which in Aramaic doesn't have a very good translation with teacher. You have the teacher in the proper sense, kind of like what you would have in More in Hebrew, but rabbi doesn't necessarily translate that well into Aramaic, and so when they translated it from the Aramaic into English, we got our master, but other translations often say rabbi. So we see that they took off the yoke of Yochanan, and they put on the covering of Yeshua by saying, "Where are you staying?" And later, we see in 41, Shimeon says, "We have found the Messiah." You don't say these things flippantly or loosely. We need to understand that this was a really big deal from a Jewish thought, Jewish perspective.
Huge.
Yet we are not told. We are not told. We do know, based upon Yochanan's understanding of Yeshua and his humility of Yeshua being greater than he, it's safe to assume that these two disciples had Yochanan's blessing to do as they did, to go and follow Yeshua and be his disciple. I emphasize this as Yochanan the Apostle, the author here, seems to make this point, whereas Matthew and Mark suggest that Andrew and his brother Shimeon were out fishing and left their boats to follow Yeshua in Matthew 4 and Mark chapter 1. Give two very different stories of how they interacted with Yeshua. It may seem like this is contradictory, but there's no reason that both of these stories cannot be true. For example, at the beginning of John chapter 2, which we'll get to, it's a story of Cana. Now, if this is in order, then they met Yeshua, they hung out with Yeshua, but then Yeshua leaves, goes to Cana, or Cana, as some may say, goes to Cana, and then we see the miracle, or goes there for the wedding with his family. Because his mom's there, because she's the one that provokes Yeshua, or prompts Yeshua to turn the water into wine. Or at least says, do as that he asked. And so, this story here in the Hebrew, Shimeon's name is translated as Kepha, but really it comes from the Aramaic Kaifa, which means rock. And so, because there's other words that you would use in Hebrew, not Kaifa. But Kaifa is what he declares Shimeon's new name. So as we continue on, now let's read through the end of this chapter, as I mentioned. A lot to cover here, and we're just going to be able to cover one subject today. And the next day, starting in verse 43, and the next day Yeshua wanted to depart to Galilee, and he met Philippus. And he said to him, "Follow me." Philippus himself was from Bethsaida, the city where Andrew and Shimeon are from. Philippus found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses wrote in the written law and in the prophets. He is Yeshua, Bar Yosef from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philippus said to him, "Come and see." Now, before we continue on, notice what Philippus is telling Nathanael. He's saying, "We have found him of whom Moses wrote in the written Torah," which refers to Deuteronomy 18. I believe it's starting in verse around 16 or 17, where it says, "And a prophet like me shall arise from among your people. You shall listen to him." That's one of the references that specifically mentions we should be looking for Messiah. And then, of course, in the prophet, there's many more places. But I want to lay that foundation because as we go forward, the concepts we're going to talk about, this is the foundation that we need to start with. Now, verse 20, where was I? Verse 47. Yeshua saw Nathanael when he came to him, and he said about him, Behold, truly a son of Israel, in whom is no deceit. Think about that blessing that Yeshua is saying over Nathanael. That's one heck of a compliment.
Yeah.
Here is a man who is coming to see the guy that was told that, okay, I'm going to go see the Messiah. But when Yeshua sees him, he says, truly, behold, truly a son of Israel, in whom is no deceit. Wow. That's pretty special. And Nathanael responds back to him and saying, Where do you know me? From where do you know me? Yeshua said to him, Before Philippus called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered and said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Yeshua said to him, Do you believe because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree? You shall see greater things than these. He said to him, Timeless truth, I speak to you all. For from this hour you shall see heavens being opened and the angels of God as they ascend and descend onto the Son of Man. There are three concepts that we're going to cover. The first one here is going to be on the got to have a sneeze coming. The first one being the fig tree. What is significant about the fig tree? Then we're going to cover the subject of the Son of God and the Son of Man. Three very large concepts that sadly I think have been misunderstood, misconstrued, and other things, largely out of ignorance. So I think we need to be careful and be also compassionate upon those that do not have the same knowledge that we have. As you learn this, you will also be enlightened and can also help enlighten others. But the Son of God, just as I mentioned, Son of God is not really mentioned a whole lot in the Tanakh. Neither is Son of Man. Son of Man is mentioned in two places, specifically Daniel and Ezekiel, where Son of God is mentioned several times, but several different contexts. But not a lot. There's not a whole lot. So what does this mean when they're saying, I see you are the Son of God? Some have taken it to mean something that I'm not sure it does when we understand Judaism from that time. Just because it's not in the Tanakh, remember we got about 400 years from the end of the prophets to Matthew, if you will. So there's a number of years that went on, and that doesn't mean that nothing happened, as we know. Even in the books of the Apocrypha that cover some of that segment, we definitely see that Adonai was still busy taking care of his people. So, in John 1:48, it says that Yeshua knew Nathanael when he was under the fig tree. The fig tree is a lesser known and studied subject. Yet, here, it offers incredible insight to this dialogue with Yeshua and Nathanael. And of course, offers a reason why Nathanael would respond the way that it is written that he responds. So with this, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 5, and we're going to read verses 1 through 5. And I'll be reading out of the Complete Jewish Bible. Oh, and this is not going to... Yes, so this is in the Complete Jewish Bible. It's 5:1 through, but if you're in a Christian Bible, it may be 4:21 going on.
4:21.
4:21 if you're in a regular Bible, 5:1 if you're in a Jewish derived Bible. So Shlomo ruled over the kingdoms from the Euphrates River through the land of Philistine to the border of Egypt. They paid tribute and served Shlomo as long as he lived. Shlomo's provisions for the day consisted of 150 bushels of fine flour, 310 bushels of meal, 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, and 100 sheep. In addition to deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened poultry. For he ruled all the area this side of the Euphrates from Tisphah to Azah. He was over all the kings on this side of the river, and he had made peace all around him on every side. Emphasize that he had peace all around him on every side. From Dan to Beersheba, Yehudah and Israel lived securely, every man under his vine and fig tree throughout the lifetime of Shlomo. Interesting. Why would they mention the fig tree? That's an interesting thing. Well, let's continue on. Using the idea of Shlomo here, let's go to Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, chapter 2, and I want to read verses 1 through 13. I am but a rose from the Sharon, just a lily in the valleys. Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the other women. Like an apple among the other trees in the forest is my darling among other men. Among the other men, I love to sit in his shadow. His fruit is sweet to my taste. He brings me to the banquet hall. His banner over me is love. Sustain me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. I wish his left arm were under my head and his right arm around me. I know this sounds a little bushy, but just bear with me. I warn you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and deer in the wilds, not to awaken or stir up love until it wants to arise. The voice of the man I love, here he comes, bounding over the hills, skipping over the hills, or bounding over the mountains, skipping over the hills. My darling is like a gazelle or a young stag. There he is, standing outside our wall, looking in through the windows, peering in through the lattice. My darling speaks. He is saying to me, get up, my love, my beauty, come away. For you see that the winter has passed, the rain is finished and gone. The flowers are appearing in the countryside. The time has come for the birds to sing, and the cooing of the doves can be heard in the land. The fig trees are forming their unripe figs, and the grapevines in bloom give out their perfume. Get up, my love, my beauty, come away. While we see a love story going on here, notice the context. Who is saying, get up, my beauty, come away, and also don't arise until your love comes. It's a masculine aspect, and it's referring to Mashiach. And the fig trees are forming their unripe figs. Interesting. Oh, wait, there's more. So now let's go to Micah chapter 4. And I want to read verses 1 through 4. But in the Achari timing, it will come about that the mountain of Adonai's house will be established as the most important mountain. It will be regarded more highly than the other hills, and people will stream there. Many Gentiles will go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Adonai, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us about his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion will go forth the Torah, the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. He will judge many peoples and arbitrate for many nations far away. They will hammer their swords into plow blades and their spears into pruning knives. Nations will now raise swords at each other. They will no longer learn war. Instead, each person will sit under his vine and fig tree with no one to upset him, for the mouth of Adonai has spoken. Micah is connecting a picture of Mashiach with the fig tree. And again, notice the connection connection with peace and the fig tree. Peace and the fig tree. Interesting. Now, let's go to Proverbs chapter 27. I'm going to read verse 18. Whoever tends the fig tree will eat its fruit, and he who is attentive to his master will be honored. Notice the connection. Whoever tends the fig tree will eat its fruits, and he who is attentive to his master will be honored. There's a connection with attentive to his master and a fig tree. Now, let's go to Hosea chapter 9. And we're going to take a look at verse 10. Hosea chapter 9, verse 10. Get out of the Plain Jewish Bible. When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the desert. When I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing a fig tree's first figs in its first season. But as soon as they came to Baal-Peor, they dedicated themselves to something shameful. They became as loathsome as the thing they loved. Wait, what? Let's read that again. When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the desert. When I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing a fig tree's first figs in its first season. But as soon as they came to Baal-Peor, they dedicated themselves to something shameful. There's a connection with obedience. And here they're turning away, and there was something shameful. Interesting. Jeremiah chapter 8. And we're going to read verses 12 to 13. They should be ashamed of their detestable deeds. But they are not ashamed at all. They don't know how to blush. So when others fall, they too will fall. When I punish them, they will stumble, says Adonai. I will put an end to them, says Adonai. There are no grapes on the vine, and what? No figs on the tree. The leaf has withered, and what I have given them will pass from their possession. That's a little bit tough. But notice the connection with the fig tree. There's no fig. When they're continuing on that idea from Hosea, when there's shame, there's no fruit on the fig tree. Zechariah, chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. Furthers this connection. For look at the stone. Zechariah chapter 3, verse 9 through 10. For look at the stone I have put in front of Yehoshua. On one stone are 7 eyes. I will engrave what is to be written on it, says Adonai. Zebaoth, I will remove the guilt of this land in one day. When that time comes, says Adonai, Zebaoth, you will all invite each other to what? Join you under your fig vines, or under your vines and fig trees. What happens on that day? Well, we know in Jeremiah it also talks about that on that day when he removes the guilt from this land, when Yeshua is king and Messiah, as we talked about, the Messianic age, no one's going to be teaching about God, for all will know who God is. As I was continuing to see what the rabbis have to say on this, there's some interesting midrash that will finish joining or bringing this connection together for us. Out of Numbers chapter 27, verse 16, we have what's known as Bamidbar Rabbah 21:15. That's out of the Mishnah, the commentary on this section. It says, "Let the Lord of the God of the spirits of all flesh appoint anyone who comes to seek the needs of the community as if he comes forcefully. Let the," and this is quoting Numbers 27:16, "let the Lord appoint." The question being asked is, what reason did Moses have to request this need after ordering of inheritance? It is simply that, since he saw the daughters of Zelophehad inherit the properties of their father, Moses said, "See, it is the time for me to claim my needs. If the daughters inherit it, it is also proper for my sons to inherit my glory." So Moses is saying, my two boys should be receiving an inheritance as well, is essentially what the argument is. But the Holy One, blessed be He, said to him in Proverbs 27:18, which is what we've read, "He who tends a fig tree will enjoy its fruit." Your sons sat with their own concerns and were not involved with Torah study. Notice we don't ever hear about Moses' kids after he passes. Or really after they get into the wilderness. They went and stayed with his father-in-law or their grandpa, Jethro. And so Moses, thinking that he deserved this for his kids, the response is they were busy doing their own concerns and were not involved with Torah study. How does this connect? Whereas Yehoshua served you much and showed you much honor. Remember what we talked about in Proverbs about the master. "And he got up early to your house of meeting and left late. He arranged the benches and spread out the mats. Since he served you with all of his ability, he was worthy to serve Israel, so as not to lose his compensation. Take Yehoshua ben Nun in order to fulfill what is stated in Proverbs 27:18. He who tends a fig tree will enjoy its fruit." Also, it's written by Rabbi Nehemiah in Sanhedrin 70b in verse 1 and Berachot 40a 14. "Connect the tree of knowledge to the fig tree and said that it is largely because after they ate of the fruit, they used fig leaves to cover themselves." In Eruvin 54a 27, Rabbi Hayya Bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, "What is the meaning that when it's written, he who guards the fig tree shall eat of its fruits? Why were the matters of Torah compared to a fig tree, just as this fig tree?" In 54b, verse 1, "Whenever a person searches it for figs to eat, he finds figs in it. As the figs on a tree do not ripen all at once, so that one can always find a recently ripened fig, so too the matters of Torah, whenever a person meditates upon them, he finds them new meaning." The reference here of a fig tree is someone who is studying the Torah, seeking to find new fruit, and someone who sits under the fig tree is one who spends time studying and meditating on his Torah, looking for new meaning. So this compliment that Yeshua gives to Nathanael about him being under the fig tree is an incredible one. Because he's saying, you are one who has studied the Torah, meditated on the Torah in such a way to be contemplating the things of Mashiach. So when he responds and says, "I see you are the King of Israel," he's saying, "I see you are the Mashiach." So we too should be studying like them, taking our time, studying the Torah, meditating on his word each and every day. Taking a little bit of time, or at least on Shabbats, taking a little time and studying on his word. May we also be